Cultural reparticularization. Now, what do I mean by cultural reparticularization? Do we struggle with Baal worship today? Does anybody really struggle with Baal? You know, in the Old Testament, they weren't supposed to worship Baal. We don't even know who Baal is anymore. Sacrifices, we don't do sheep and goat sacrifices, grain sacrifices anymore. Clean and unclean. Do we do clean and unclean? No, we don't really do that anymore. Altars. Did their altars have to be built in a special way? Did the Jewish altars have to be built in a special way? Okay. Yeah, the Jews' altars were supposed to be built of uncut stone as compared to the Canaan altars which were built out of cut stone. So this is, okay, we don't build altars anymore, so these rules don't really apply to us. But then you've got to ask, do some of these laws, can you go underneath the cultural particulars to a universal underlying principle? Can you take the cultural particular off and find the underlying universal principle? Okay? And that's the case with Baal worship. Would that have to do with idolatry? In whatever shape that takes place in your culture, it would have to take place with idolatry. Sacrifices. Jesus Christ dying for our sins and realizing sins and things like that. So this is... okay, so what I'm suggesting is then that the Old Testament will have a culture. You've got to pull off sometimes the cultural particulars and look at the underlying principle. Okay? And now let me just do that a little bit more. This is the key then, I think, is this underlying principle rather than the cultural particular. Jesus gives a model of this, I think, in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, you know, if your brother's angry with you, if you're angry with your brother in your heart, don't, you've committed murder already in your heart. And so Jesus basically takes the law and drives it into the heart, okay? So what I'm suggesting then is that this, work with the principles that underlie the cultural particulars. Now, I'm going to make one more step, and this next step is actually discovered this a few years ago, and this is difficult. Did God accommodate himself to culture when he gave the law? Did God accommodate himself to culture? In other words, I originally thought that God, when he came down to Mount Sinai, gave his perfect law, that this is the way it's supposed to be like in heaven. This is the perfect thing, and this is the way I want it run. But then I came across a statement in the New Testament that Jesus makes in Matthew chapter 19, verse 8. And let me just read this to you. I think it's transformed the way I look at the law. Matthew chapter 19, verse 8, it says this. The question is on divorce, and it says this. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Did Moses allow for divorce? Deuteronomy chapter 24. Moses allows for a man to divorce his wife. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 24. Moses allows for divorce. Deuteronomy chapter 24. Question, is that perfect? Is that a perfect world? Moses allows for divorce. What does God say about divorce? In Malachi, God says, I hate divorce. Is that fairly clear? He says, I hate divorce. Okay? It's fairly clear what God thinks about, I hate divorce. You say, well, if God hates it in Malachi, why did Moses allow for it in Deuteronomy chapter 24? Jesus here tells us the why. Does Jesus know the why behind the law? Yeah, Jesus was like there, okay? So Jesus says this. Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. Why? Because your hearts were hard. Because your hearts were hard. Did God adapt his law because of the hardness of these people's hearts? Yeah. He doesn't come down and say, this is my perfect law. You guys have to do this. He says, no, that perfect law is not going to work with these people because they're so stinking corrupt. Now, what's that mean? Many, many years ago, I taught this passage, and I was in a small college in the Midwest called Grace College. I went over this passage, and I said, you know what Jesus means here is that basically guys are so corrupt, if you can't divorce your wife, what would men do to their wives? Till death do us part, we've promised and stuff. And therefore, what would men do that can't divorce their wife? They hate their wife. They want to get rid of her. What would they do? They'd kill their wife. They'd kill their wife to be out of the marriage. And so I go off and I'm talking about this, the guys. By the way, do people, even in America, do some guys kill their wives to get rid of their wives? So I'm going off like this. This lady comes up to me afterwards, probably a 35-year-old woman, comes up to me and she says, "Who told you? You're not supposed to know. Nobody here is supposed to know. How did you know?" She's getting all this paranoid suspicion stuff. I said, "Lady, I just made that example up, you understand? On this guy killing this wife. I wasn't referring to anything particular and stuff." She said, No, you were talking about me. You just laid out the whole situation. Who told you?" And I said, "Well," and basically what happened is this lady, just the honest truth, she was from Colorado. This is so many years ago, it doesn't matter now, but she was from Colorado. Her husband took out a hit on her. I forget what it was, $10,000 or whatever. She found out that her husband paid somebody to kill her. She found out about it. She took the kids and she fled to Indiana. We had these places, I think they're called safe houses and stuff, where a woman can go with their family and stuff and be protected. And so she was at a safe house. Nobody was supposed to know where she lived or what happened. She was at a safe house and she was taking courses at a college, trying to get her education and stuff like that. But did her husband pay to have her killed? Yes, and she was fleeing from that. And so I'm saying, even till this day, you get this thing. Jesus says, because of the hardness of their heart. Did God adapt his law because these people's hearts were so hard? He didn't want these women getting killed. And so he said, hey, okay, you can do divorce. Because what? Now, by the way, is divorce God's perfect will? God says he hates divorce, but did he allow what he hated because he didn't want these people killed? Okay? And so what I'm saying is God adapted to the culture. Okay, so you got to be careful. If you just say God came down and gave us perfect, this is how it's supposed to be in heaven. This is how it. No. God said these people are such sinners and stuff. I got to adapt this, so they're going to kill each other and stuff. So it just, I don't know. That's shaped. Do you see how that changes then? How you look at the law? That sometimes okay, it's got a law of divorce, but Jesus said it's because of the hardness of your hearts that God did that way in particular and stuff. So here's another thing I work with. I call canonical continuity and canonical clashing. Do certain parts of the Bible say that what's okay, if I said to you lobster, clean or unclean? Unclean, okay? Catfish, clean or unclean? Unclean, okay? Did the Jews have real clean stuff and unclean stuff? But by the way, in the New Testament, does Jesus in a vision tell Peter to get up and eat? And it's all unclean stuff. And Peter says, what? No, I can't do that, God, because my mouth has never had anything unclean in Acts chapter 15. And God says, get up and eat it. I don't call unclean what I've called clean. And Peter is told to eat all this non-kosher stuff in the New Testament because God's trying to show that, no, the kosher laws are passed now. If you're a Christian, you have to eat kosher. And the answer is no. Acts chapter 15 tells us that we as Christians don't have to eat kosher, okay? And so some of the law gets changed, and so there's these canonical clashings, okay? The Old Testament did it this way. In the New Testament, we're not going to do it that way, and so there's clashings between. When you see those clashings, you know what? Is that part of the law cultural? Was it for that culture and not for our culture? So when you see the clashing then, you can see these divergences in culture. The culture has changed, and therefore the law needs to be changed in some of this stuff. Yeah, Pete?
How do you say that this part of the law being passed away? Jesus said the law wouldn't pass away.
Yeah, no. Actually, what I would say is that the law is not passing away. What was the function of that law? Okay, the function of the law with the eating kosher food, was that a ethnic, cultural, how should I say, marker for the Jewish people that they were part of the Jewish community? And what's happening now is not passing away. The Jewish people, it's actually expanding because now the Gentiles are included in. And as therefore, because the Gentiles are including in, how should I say, it's expanded. In other words, you don't need these cultural, ethnic identifiers anymore because the church is the whole world now. And so it's not passing away so much as expanding and being blown out in, how should I say, yeah, expanding. And in one sense, it's being fulfilled by being expanded, not. See, I say passing away meant that the law would be violated. In other words, the law still is good. It's fulfilled its purpose. Its purpose was the identifying of the Jewish people, and now it's got to give way because that ethnic thing is giving way. It's not passing away. So I'm saying it would be expanding and going on greater. then yeah, I don't know that I'd call it passed over. I want to say it would be fulfilled, and it's fulfilled in a more comprehensive way, in a more expansive way. And so it's not like, this is bad now. No, it had its place, it had its time, and now it's actually still got its place in time, but it's being blown out now. It's being more comprehensive. But yeah, but the law, there are some things that change like that. The dietary laws are real clear because Acts 15 makes it real clear we don't have to eat kosher. And so you get that kind of thing. And so there's continuity and there's discontinuity. Okay? And actually, that's actually what I want to have been saying. There's between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's continuity. There's also some aspects of discontinuity. And the discontinuity will often be in this fulfillment into the greater that's coming. You know what I'm saying? So it was here, it was smaller, and then when you get in the church, it'll expand and becomes more comprehensive and things. So, yeah. Okay, now, is the law good or bad? Well, if the law leads you to legalism, the law is bad. If the law leads to legalism, it's bad. If a person finds security in performance, then the law is bad, okay? Because you're getting secure in the law, not in your faith in Christ, okay? The externalization of religion. If one keeps the law, and the law then gives them external markers that you're religious because you have these external markers, that again is not the function of the law in things. If the law leads you to feeling so good about yourself that you start condemning others because others don't keep the law, and you do keep the law, and therefore you start looking down your nose and condemning other people, that's not the function of the law either. So the law can be bad in that sense, that it can lead you to a sense that I'm better than other people, and largely leads you to this, to pride, that a person that keeps the law can actually get proud in the law and stuff. Hannah?
Would it be better to say it was misused in those situations? Because the law
Yeah.
isn't always being used.
Well, yeah, no, I want to do it this way. So we'll do it this way. Okay. So pride, if law can lead to pride, the person taking the law and leading it to pride and stuff. Earning salvation. A person can take the law and say, if I keep the law, then I can earn my salvation. If a person earns their salvation, question, do they depend upon grace? So, okay, so the law can have these various functions, and even the term law is used in many different ways. So these are some negative ways that the law can be misinterpreted, misused, those types of things. Now, what about grace? What about grace? You said you speak very highly of grace. What about grace? Is grace good or bad? Grace can lead to license. A person can say, hey, the grace of God, God will forgive me, so I can go out and do this bad stuff that I know I shouldn't be doing, saying, well, God will forgive me, and therefore grace actually ends up being an enticement to sin because you figure God will forgive you and things. So, pardon? Yes, exactly. And Paul says grace is good, but if grace leads you to, sin, God forbid, and Paul says that stuff. I can do anything and I'll be forgiven. If a person has that mindset of I can do anything and I'll be forgiven, very, very grace is leading you down the wrong road. And so grace has this negative things. This is the big one, the devaluing of sin. And this is actually a big problem, I think, in our culture. Our culture pushes grace. Our culture pushes grace, the disconnection between act and consequence. That is one of the biggest things in our culture that keeps many young people in foolishness rather than in wisdom. The disconnection of act and consequence. Because they think they can act with no consequences. And the problem is there are consequences. And so sin is devalued. Sin is devalued. You always get a second chance. You always get a second chance. And so that kind of thing, grace is bad. Now, okay, next time when we get to this section, we're going to talk about some laws that are very difficult. And one of those laws will be the laws of war. And so we want to talk about some laws that rattle our bones, and we'll hit those tough laws next time, okay?